Have you ever wondered how to make a proposal stronger, or wondered who is the right agency or department to work with on a procurement? Or perhaps you wanted to know more about challenge-based procurements. Well, there's no more wondering. In today's session, we will answer those questions and more. Let me introduce our guest. On the right and hosting our event is Russ Nichols, California Chief Deputy Director and Deputy State Chief Information Officer. Joining him are our expert procurement team. On the left, Tiffany Angulo, Deputy Director, Statewide Technology Procurement at the California Department of Technology, and Angela Schell, State Chief Procurement Officer and Deputy Director of the Procurement Division at the Department of General Services. With that, let's get started.
All right, thank you, Janelle. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our second Tech Talk with CDT. And I'd really like to thank Angela and Tiffany for joining us today, two of our preeminent experts in the state of California on how to acquire things in general. So as it relates to procurement, this is probably something we could do one of these every day for the next couple of weeks. Procurement in California is very complex, and it covers such a huge breadth of things, from buying a couple of mice or office supplies to literally hundreds of millions of dollars on some contracts and everything in between. So there's a whole bunch of information. Our goal today is to take a very, very complex process and rules and statutes that guide procurement, break it down, make it a little easier to understand. We do invite you to ask questions. So as Janelle mentioned, as we go through the course of the conversation, if you have a question essentially in flight in the Zoom product, go ahead and type that into the Q&A section, and we'll see that pop up. We have a moderator here who should be able to help us identify the questions, and we can address some of them in flight. We'll also save about 15 minutes at the very end and do a more interactive process at that point. So if you have a question at the end of the session, you use the raise my hand function in Zoom, and we will call on you. You can actually ask the question or respond to it then. So with that, let me start with a really high-level description of procurement. And Angela, I'm going to lean on you. California procurement is guided by statute and policy that is essentially, in the big picture, a DGS realm of responsibility. Can you kind of describe that and the nature of procurement in the state?
Sure, thanks for the question. So just to back up just a step, so the Department of General Services is known as the business manager for the state of California. And so at General Services, we provide a lot of services to state departments, real estate, and procurement is one of those, buildings, those sorts of things. And so at DGS, we are operating in both an oversight role for the state of California procurement. So we issue policy and procedure. We issue leveraged procurement agreements that state departments are able to buy off of. We do certification of small businesses and disabled veteran business enterprises. We actually issue purchasing authority to state departments. And then outside of that oversight role, we also have a purchasing arm within the procurement division in DGS that does purchasing on behalf of state departments when their purchasing authority has been exhausted. So we also, with respect to IT, we manage the state's IT general terms and conditions, and we negotiate those with the IT community, and we, update those, post those on our website, and state departments, including the Department of Technology, use those terms and conditions in state procurements.
All right, thank you. So as everybody can see, procurement's a really simple topic, one size fits all. So it really does get very complex, whether we're talking about general procurements or very specific items. And between the two departments, between CDT and DGS, there are projects, efforts, programs where we work together to make sure that departments are effective. There are some where you go through one or the other, but not both. And we realize that it can be very complex and sometimes maybe on the surface not make sense, but we're guided by different statute, different responsibilities, and different availability of services in there. But one of the things that we want to really get through today is how to work through that process how to know where to go, and where you can go with questions. And so I think that's one of the big things. Knowing that most of the audience is from the vendor community, we hope this is informative, helps people kind of guide you through that maze. But please, again, feel free to ask some questions if you see them pop up. So let's start with maybe the first softball here, which is really, how does IT procurement work between CDT and DGS? And Angela, you want to start there?
Yeah, so I'll start, and I touched on this a little bit earlier. So DGS issues what we call leveraged procurement agreements that are, excuse me, large scale agreements that state departments, when they have a need for an IT good or an IT service, they can procure from those agreements. And so ours apply to all state departments and local entities as well. And so we have different types of leveraged procurement agreements that we issue. And then, if it's more in-depth to that, if it's, related to like an IT project, then it's something that goes over to CDT, and CDT steps in and looks at, the types of projects. And I'll let Tiffany kind of cover, how that works on the CDT side with respect to IT procurement.
Thank you, Angela. Russ. So CDT really provides oversight in the IT realm for the IT projects that go through the stage gate approval process. So those are mostly the large, complex, multi-year contracts that we work with. So the difference for those of you out there is really, if you're going through what we call the project approval process, it's a stage gate process, that's where you would turn to CDT for your oversight. And we also conduct procurements for those agencies. We also produce the policy related to the IT procurements that are tethered to those non-delegated projects. We provide the oversight can include utilizing the DGS LPAs. So many times we do partner with DGS, and Angela and I will talk about different projects and how we could efficiently work through that process. In addition, though, we also differ in a little way because we provide data hosted services, shared services. So we have a vendor hosted service with that. And we also do all telecommunications. So the CalNet program is under us. We have cellular type things. We do public safety. So we do definitely have our different swim lanes. But when it comes to IT, it is one of those partnerships that we have to work through.
And like all good things, IT, there's a lot of acronyms that we throw in. LPAs, leverage procurement agreements. A number of those different types of agreements. CMAS, California Multiple Award Schedule, MSAs, Master Service Agreements. Those are things, when we say leverage procurement, those allow departments to use a pre-existing contract. Vendors that have already been through really the procurement process have an underlying contract with the state.
Yeah.
Departments can use those for smaller engagements that are delegated or within their authority to go out and consume either goods or services or combinations of those. We also have software licensing program, SLP. Those are all administered through DGS. Typically, a department would have the authority to use those on their own. Those can be combined with some of the things we do at CDT with some of the bigger procurements. So on a large scale project, we will do the major procurement, but it might be augmented with SLP purchases and
Correct.
MSA agreements and things like that. So it becomes a big puzzle of things that come together.
Yeah, and I would just offer that this is a 45-minute fireside chat. There's so much information to consume, and really Angela and I are here looking into ways to support the vending community to learn these different acronyms and to kind of navigate you through the different processes, right? So procurement starts with us in the project approval lifecycle, but it doesn't end there. We do we call it a once a project, always a project. So once it goes into project approval lifecycle, gets implemented, goes lives, and goes into M&O or maintenance and operations. Sorry. We also take those procurements on any DevOps or DD&I. Again, more acronyms. Sorry, I'm trying to stop that. And then also any of those procurements again that come through telecommunications that are not PAL related. So there's a lot to learn, but we're trying to get better at educating, I think. So this is less complex.
Yeah, and if I could add to that, thank you, Tiffany. And, just to kind of boil it down even further. So the agreements that DGS issues may require a department to get an offer from several different vendors that are on these contracts. And, a department itself may have a singular procurement. Ours are, we have multiple vendors on contract. And they're there for departments to use, and departments may solicit any of these number of vendors for quotes, and then they issue an individual procurement. So ours are more of the broader agreement. Departments issue individual procurements off of those agreements that we put in place. And I think that can be a common misunderstanding if you're starting out in, doing state contracting, that DGS's agreements are there for use by individual departments. They are not necessarily a guarantee of a procurement because you're, issued on or you have a contract on a leveraged procurement agreement.
Thank you. So one of the questions that has popped up is about some overlap. And the reality is that as technology matures and things change over time, there has been some overlap in some of the procurement authority between DGS and CDT. And I think one of the predominant areas where there has been some overlap is telecom. And in fact, if you go back, and I don't remember the specific date, a few years, telecom was specifically under DGS and is in the process actually of migrating to CDT. And that might sound like an easy thing to do. Well, we just flip the switch and now CDT will do it. However, when you think about the number of telecom contracts that are in place across the state, and they don't all have the same end date, that actually becomes a very prolonged process of moving things across, managing contracts that are in flight, reissuing new contracts. So I think the important thing here is just to acknowledge, yes, there has been some overlap. And as we move forward with telecom, more and more will move to CDT, but that's a very planned process, not just flip the switch, because we do have those existing agreements that we still honor as a state.
And I would just add to that, Russ, there's also areas of technology that as we move through modernizing legacy systems, right? I think some of the overlap also lies within IT versus non-IT. And IT does become non-IT does become IT eventually, and so that's another sticking point right now that we're experiencing, and Angela and I are working together. So that kind of I guess exercise or drills we run, we really are trying to provide guidance again around how you move your legacy system into more modernized IT purchasing methods.
That's another thing that I think dramatically changes over time. What's IT versus non-IT? A refrigerator used to be absolutely non-IT. Plug it into the wall and it gets cold.
Right.
Now, a lot of refrigerators, especially in an environment, clinical setting, where refrigeration is required for medication, for example, those are IT devices that have logging and security parameters and a whole bunch of IT built into it. Even though its main job is to keep medication secure and cold, it's reporting. It's a network device that is actually managed like any other IT device. And so those lines constantly move. So these folks have a huge challenge in their organizations as they're doing procurements to figure out, is this today an IT device? Will it be tomorrow? How do we manage that to make sure that we're protecting not only the state, but the vendor community as we make this procurement?
Yeah, and we do that on a procurement by procurement basis. So because our procurements are large scale and long term, every time we renew something, so it goes back out to bid, again, it's a conversation we're having with CDT about, are the goods and services on this particular contract do they still fall under that same definition? So we are actively engaged in that.
So one of the questions that's popped up has been around a term that I used, smaller engagements. And could you please define that? And the short answer is no. The reason the answer is no is that gets fairly complicated because there's delegated authority by both DGS and CDT. CDT is looking at project authority, procurement authority from DGS. There are different levels at different departments. As you would imagine, the DMV and EDED have huge procurement authority compared to a very small organization. So there is no simple definition of smaller engagement. It will vary by organization. A lot of times it's dependent on risk as well of what's going on. So there isn't a simple one size fits all answer to that. I think the best response probably is that as the procurement organizations, we'll work with folks to figure that out. There is actually a document that's published, I believe, annually to each department to say what your delegated authorities are
Yeah.
on different contract vehicles, that every CIO and procurement official at the department that you're talking to should know of. If not, they should be calling Angela or Tiffany, and we can help them connect those dots so they'll know what their procurement authority is by type of procurement vehicle.
Correct.
All right. So let me jump to the next question here. I'm an organization on the outside and I have a product or a service to sell and I want to market it to the state. How do I do that? Where do I go?
So I'll start on that one. And again, kind of going back to the bigger picture of what DGS is doing versus an individual department is doing. So, one of the best ways to market, what your software is or your goods or your services is really first you're looking at what's on those leverage procurement agreements, understanding that it's a large scale agreement. It's not necessarily a guarantee of a contract, but it's a vehicle that a state department can use if they have a need. But really your best opportunity is to reach out to those individual departments, find out what are departments buying. We have a lot of tools online today where departments are putting their look ahead reports up on their websites. Those are linked to the DGS website as well. Cali Procure is also a place where you want to look to see, what are the advertisements? What are the historical advertisements? Many people don't know that you can go back in and look at what's historically been advertised in the Cali Procure system to see what departments have. So you go in and you ask to meet with the department. You ask to meet with their small business or DVBE advocate to give them information on what you have. Put together a company statement. It's imperative that you have a conversation, but you need to have those documents that gives that program at a department or that advocate at a department a way to remember you. What is specifically do you sell? Things like, your services, how long have you been in business? Who have your customers and your clients been? Have you worked for a government entity, the state of California, a local, somebody out of the state of California? Those are all things that, you can do to really market your business to those individual departments, because remember, they're buying from my agreements. And so oftentimes people will come to DGS and say, procurement division, we want to market our services to you. And that's great for a leveraged procurement agreement once those are coming up. But unfortunately, I'm not buying from my leveraged procurement agreements. And so really your best bet is to reach out to specific departments and market your services. And I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I
Tiffany.
think that's great, Angela. Do keep in mind that DGS is your single portal for that marketing or getting to do business with the state, right? So although we work with departments, right, we don't individually market for any solutions or services out there. So the most effective way, again, is work with DGS. We do seek feedback though through these types of forums, or we also provide vendor days. We look for different ways to increase, or improve the way we're doing procurement. But again, we don't individually market to departments. You should really be partnering with the CIOs or the AIOs or the ISOs within that department. And another pro tip, I like to call them, is, show me the money. So we have very public BCPs out there, so you could see what's been funded for the upcoming years. That's another educational point there as well.
Yeah, and just one thing to add, if you are on a leveraged procurement agreement, you want to be able to market that you are on that LPA. This is what you've been approved to sell or to offer on that leveraged procurement agreement. And so make sure that you're letting that department know that, this is what I am able to sell. And, one note of caution that we always like to, give our vendors is make sure that you're selling what's on the contract, not what's not on the contract. We do encounter that at times with, vendors that have a great new product that they want to sell to the state. They're excited about it, but it's not actually on the leverage procurement agreement. And so, when vendors go out and do that, it really puts those departments at jeopardy, because if we find that departments are buying things that were not done in a competitive nature, that were not done off of an existing contract, it jeopardizes their purchasing authority. And so, it could cause them to not have the ability to purchase IT at all. And so we never want to put a vendor in that position or the state in that position. So, always market what you've been approved to offer on that leverage procurement agreement.
And just one thing to add on the marketing part of that. So we've recognized that technology refreshes are a real thing, right? As we move through this, we're working through contracts on our telecom side to ensure that there's an open period or reopen period, so vendors can look forward to adding those new technologies or enhancements. So we do recognize that.
So let me restate part of that, then I'll ask you maybe a gotcha question a little bit. So as we mentioned, as you get on leverage procurement agreement, the state, in particular DGS, as they administer that program, the state's not marketing and saying, because you're on LPA, this is the product that the department has to use, or this is even a recommended product, but it is available. And what that process does is make the procurement process much simpler. It's not a formal procurement when a department wants to acquire it. It's a leverage procurement, much quicker. They get to what they want, and the terms and conditions, a lot of things are already taken care of. You're really dealing with the minutia of statement of work or whatever document really supports that for the specific purchase. So if a company does have something that is not on their leverage procurement agreement, and a department wants to acquire that product or that type of a product, I think this is one of the areas where people feel like they're in a little bit of a cul-de-sac. So I know there's new technology. There are 2 or 3 companies that have LPAs, that have something on SLP or one of the other agreements. But it's not what I want, and I know it's out there. How do I go get that?
So the first thing that department should do is, check with DGS to see, as Tiffany mentioned earlier, is there a refresh cycle? The vendor should also, as soon as you have something that's newer technology or just, something you want to add, come to DGS and find out, what are my options for adding it to the leverage procurement agreement? Because it may be that, depending on the type of the contract, there is an opportunity. Now, there might be a little bit of time, and they're not all the same. So you might have to wait, an amount of time before you can add it, but always ask the question. Don't assume it's no, don't assume it's yes. And so if it's not already on the leverage procurement agreement, then it really depends on, what it is you're looking to buy, what the cost is there an opportunity to use, a small business? If you are a small business, is it, under the thresholds for doing a minimum of 2 quote method with an SB or a DVBE? Is it such a small dollar value that it's considered fair and reasonable and you don't actually have to do competition? Or does it get you into the realm where, it is over those thresholds and so competition does have to be done, with an RFP or an RFQ or, some other method that we might have.
So I think maybe to round that out, departments have a delegated authority for procurement. There are some things that are so small that the overhead of a full RFP or competitive process wouldn't make sense. And there is a mechanism to acquire things that are under that threshold. But assuming that I have a need, there are products out there that I know would fulfill that. A department often does have the ability to do a competitive-based procurement and not have to go to a CDT or DGS to execute that. And I think that's important for both the vendor community and our departments to realize that departments can do that. But the requirement then is a real official competitive procurement and it can't be just a shoot from the hip or, buy one, get one free type of thing. So it's more formal, but any vendors or any departments that you're working with that have questions about that, the real key there is to get in contact with DGS procurement or CDT procurement, and we can help address some of those questions and really identify, is this something that's within that delegated authority? How do they go about that? And if not, how can we help solve that problem? That's why DGS and CDT are here, is to help organizations get to the goals that they have. All right, with that, I did see another question pop up, which is both procurement and really a project authority. If a department has a project that they're considering, how do they know if they have to go to CDT or to DGS? I'll address the CDT side a little bit. Some of that is based on your project authority and how the project itself is authorized. If there was a BCP that funded it, the department has to come to CDT as an IT oversight organization and say, this is our project, here's how we're going to do it. And we can delegate that back to a department, depends on the risk, the size of the project, the experience in the department, things along those lines. And with that, we can then choose whether we will delegate whether we'll conduct procurement or would it all be done through leverage procurements or things along those lines. So it becomes a discussion to get that on the table. But if it's clearly within the project delegation of a department, then if it's an open procurement within their delegation, they could do it. Or they could go to DGS and DGS would execute that. But again, if there's any question about those delegation levels, the easiest answer is to contact either CDT or DGS, and we can help unwind that, because I know it can be complicated. It's, again, not a simple answer.
Yeah, and one thing I would just add to that, just that, project delegation is not the same as procurement delegation. So, I just want to make sure that that's very, very clear, that just because somebody has a certain level of project delegation from the Department of Technology does not mean you have the same level as a Department of Purchasing Authority delegation. And so that's where, the reach out happens with, okay, I have, X dollars of project authority. Do I have X dollars of procurement authority as things come up? And if the answer is no, there's, several ways to solve that, either directly through CDT, through DGS, through looking at the purchasing authority, all of those things. But that does tend to cause a lot of confusion, both on the state side and on the vendor side, because one assumes that they are the same and they are not.
Right.
So.
And yeah, and Angela too, the departments are, available to answer those types of questions too. So you don't have to necessarily come directly through us, right? Every department has the purchasing PAC and purchasing authority contact that you could reach out to as well to help with those questions.
Right. And to further muddy the waters, it's not just project authority and purchasing authority. It can be purchasing authority by contract vehicle type. So
Yes.
your MSA level and
Yes.
your CMS level will probably almost always be different.
Yeah.
And so there is a whole schedule. And again, those can be found, should be the procurement folks in a department should have easy access to that. If not, they can surely contact DGS.
It's
They're
also
publicly-
online.
Yeah, they're publicly posted.
Yeah, it's online, and it all of the 4 tiers, we have 4 tiers of purchasing authority are listed. And then there's a list of departments, and it says what tier those departments have.
And when we say online at the DGS website.
The DGS website, yes.
And I did see another question pop up in reference to BCPs that are published. A BCP that has been approved is published on the Department of Finance website.
Yeah.
So I don't have the direct link, but it is, I think, fairly easy to find on the Department of Finance website.
Yes. Another area to look to, though, is CDT does host on the project approval lifecycle where the project could be potentially either in stage 1, 2, 3, or 4. So that's another area to kind of look at, pay attention to.
All right, thank you. All right, so a big picture question for you two. What can vendors do to make responses to procurements more successful?
You want to start with that one?
Okay, yeah. So I always say do your research, right? Going back to when that solicitation is out there, matrixing it back to the objectives, right, of the BCP, maybe that it was tethered to, looking at the project approval lifecycle documents, and do your research, right? Because the procurement will mainly speak to what it is we're trying to obtain. Then there's always, looking at the contract, making sure that you've identified, I call it practice. So if you're in a position where you're responding to RFPs, don't make the first RFP you respond to the first time you see an RFP. There's tons of publicly posted RFPs that you could take a look at to get familiar with the different areas that you're required to submit, the areas that you're supposed to check the boxes and comply. So I say practice. Practice makes perfect with that. And then there's also different sections of the RFP that you might want to framework out just on a piece of paper and say, okay, as I've read through this area, right, I notated that I have an action to take. Many times we do know also that vendors work in silos within their companies, right? So you may take the RFP and piece it out to legal or accounting or the technical folks, right? So QA/QC at the end of the day is really helpful in being a qualified vendor to compete. Other things are take a look at the instructions, the conditions, terms and conditions wrapped around it, kind of identify those risks and mitigate them before you submit the proposal. If you feel your company is in a position where they wouldn't accept XYZ term, right? Making sure that you're prepared for the process. Some of these have varying key action dates. And I'm sure Angela will mimic all of this. Those are very important dates to take action to. So first and foremost, take a look at those key action dates.
Yeah, and all those things are, very, very true. And I would say, there's a lot of tools that are available during the procurement process that can be used. So things like looking at the key action date, there's a Q&A process, in our procurements that are posted that are, fully competitive. There's always a Q&A process. Use it to your advantage. If, you are unclear about something the solicitation is asking you to do, with a submittal or a requirement of the solicitation, ask. That is your opportunity. That is a tool for you to use. And so, if there is a pre-bid meeting or a pre-proposal meeting, everybody uses slightly different terms, attend it. Even if it's not mandatory, attend it. That's your opportunity to hear other questions that others might ask that maybe you didn't think about. And it can help you be more, successful in your proposal. I think there's other things that you can do if you are not the successful proposer or bidder. Ask for feedback from that state department. Ask them, what could you have done better? Maybe your narrative wasn't as descriptive as it could have been, and that buyer can give you, information on, well, here's where you could have elaborated more in your proposal. It isn't a time to say, well, what did the other bidders do? Because the buyers aren't going to give you that information. And so if you've experienced that and they've said, well, no, I can't tell you that. It's because the focus is really on what's done in your specific proposal and how the state can help you get better, the next time you submit. And then the last thing I would say is, and I think Tiffany's, touched on it, that make sure that you understand what's being asked for. If the state's asking you for a classification of, project manager, don't send them, something that's an office administrator. And that's an extreme example, but, be clear on what the state is asking and what your response is, to that request.
I like that you brought the point up about, Angela, about debriefing is what we call it. After contract award, that's a really valuable process to learn, right, where the mistakes or pitfalls were. And just to add, the overall theme, Russ, is that, we do recognize some of those areas that vendors are unsuccessful. And we really want to bring education to them out through forums and doing these types of things. But also, as we talked about the Q&A, right? So the trends are, we are really trying to be transparent. We're trying to be gone with the days where it felt like when you go into procurement, you go into a black hole and, you don't hear something. So we're really trying to open those doors, be transparent, because the vendors are our partners in this.
I think I just want to build on that a little bit, because one of the things in my experience in the state, I've seen a lot of procurements that were written by folks in the state with the best of intent. I knew exactly what I meant when I wrote it, and it's interpreted completely different when it gets to the vendor community. And whether that's because we're overloading terms, or we're using acronyms, or not enough context, that feedback loop, that ability to ask questions, I think is one of the most important things in any sort of a solicitation process. Be clear that both sides, both the requester, the state, and the respondent, are answering the same question or addressing the same question. Because far too often when we see the responses, that's not what we thought we were going to get. And so if there are things that we can do to clarify, absolutely, that's what that process is for. There's give and take. And as we get questions, we may realize that we've asked the wrong question or put in the wrong requirement, but we only know that with that feedback. So please take advantage of that process, whether it's a CDT executed procurement, DGS, or even department executed procurement. Engage in that process. It's much better to delay it and have to reissue with a clarification or something to make sure that we're all talking about the same thing. It makes life easier for all of us. I think it establishes those partnerships that Tiffany just mentioned. All right. Thank you very much. So another question, as a small business, what opportunities exist for me to secure state contracts?
So we touched on it a little bit earlier. There are a few programs within the state. The first thing that you want to make sure you do is get certified. If you are eligible to be certified, and all of that information is on the DGS website, it is an online certification, but get certified so that you're in our database and our state departments know that you're there to use. But we do have a couple of other things. We have a program called the Dvbe Option that allows awards of goods and services up to $249,999 for those two programs. And it is, again, a minimum of 2 quotes, either small business or DVBE, and it can be awarded based on best value versus low bid. Doesn't mean a department won't use low bid, but they have the option of using best value. So it's a little bit easier procurement process. And for public works, it goes up to, I think it's 388,000 today. That's adjusted every 2 years. We also offer a preference for small business. If you're certified as a small business, you get a 5% preference, which means just for bid price comparison only, your bid gets, cut down by 5%. You still get, if you are the awarded vendor, you still get the contract at what you bid. But for price comparison purposes, we reduce the bid by 5% to give that small business an opportunity to compete. So that's one of the other programs that we have. We also have the what we call fair and reasonable. So it's up to $10,000 where buyers are able to award directly to a small business or DVBE. And they just have to validate that the price is, again, fair and reasonable. So those are some of the programs that we have that are eligible for small business and DVBEs. And I would encourage, those entities, especially if you're new to the state, to really market under those programs so that you can start to get your foot in the door and see what state contracting is about.
Yeah, thank you. DGS is the holder of those programs or the administrators of those. So CDT really just partners with DGS to try and enhance our small business participation. And for us, we really look for ways to maybe modularize procurements to kind of make a smaller body of work so that it is feasible for small businesses. And we also do apply the same incentives as DGS does. So those still apply to the large IT procurements as well.
Okay, so we are about 5 minutes from our targeted end time. We'll go into some Q&A, and we still have about 25 pages of questions here. So we knew that procurement would be a topic that would generate a lot of our action, which is a very good thing. So
I see a part 2 coming.
yes. Chapter 2. There are a couple of questions that have come in online that I think we're going to address fairly quickly. One of them, again, relates back to the BCPs. How do we know which ones are approved? So this is really probably something we should push to a Department of Finance type of question, but I think I can address that really quickly. So as a BCP comes in, it's included as part of the governor's budget, for example. The proposed information is out there, and then a department will often go through budget hearings with the state legislature. Information is available. When it is actually approved and it's in the budget, it is posted out there on the finance website, and you can pull those down from there. Anything that is posted there is an approved BCP. As far as statutory exemptions, the state
Those happen. Yes,
Yeah.
those do
Yeah,
happen.
so if there's an exemption, then you are not going to have CDT or DGS oversight over that procurement. And that exemption may state that no competition has to be done. It may also just simply state it doesn't exempt from competition, but it exempts DGS and CDT oversight. So there's many different ways that statutory exemptions can be written and are written.
Be cautious though with those. They do have expiration dates. So
And I think this is an area where the last few years, the pandemic has actually increased confusion because we were under emergency operations. There were procurements that were done outside of normal processes. And now we're coming to either renewing or potentially another contract in a related area, and people are frustrated. We didn't have to go through this last time.
Correct.
Well, last time was an emergency procurement done under an emergency authorization, but it is in that event, it was not subject to public contract code. That exemption is now expired. And so we're not being forced to go through a gauntlet just for our entertainment. It is actually following the statute that we have on the books. Now, those statutes do change over time, and our processes will be modified over time. But that's the reason people are seeing we did something 9 months ago or 18 months ago, and it's different than what we're doing now. Absolutely, it was because of that, the emergency. That's probably one of the best examples. But to Angela's point, there are specific programs or other things that come up that are statutorily authorized to be exempt from, could be a bunch of different things. Yeah. All right. There was a question that I saw a little while ago around the e-procure process and the tool that is used out there, and frankly, some frustration. I think at a real small statement, I'll just make a soapbox statement, let you respond to it. Like all services in the state, we have something that exists, but part of our operation as a state is to continually improve those. So are there improvements? Is there a plan or a direction for updating or somehow changing that e-procure platform?
Yeah, we are always looking at Kelly Procure. And so the front end is what we call our Kelly Procure, and that is our search engine. And then the back end is the actual system itself that, comes off of our Fiscal system. And so, yeah, we are always looking at ways to enhance that. If you are an interested bidder, you're not already a vendor, or actually it works both. If you're both an interested bidder or an actual vendor with the state of California, you can actually go in and create an account in Kelly Procure. We recently did a modernization, I'd say within the last year, where you actually have your own homepage in the Kelly Procure system, and you can sign up for specific departments that you want to get notified, specific acquisitions. You can put your certification status, all those things in there. So, there's opportunities for you to sort of down select a little bit so that you're getting notified about what you actually want to know about, instead of having to go in and try and search the entire Kelly Procure system. And so, yeah, we are continuing to work through, upgrades to the system. And if you have questions about how to use the Kelly Procure system, please reach out to us. We have videos online as well. And so if you have any questions, we have a team of outreach specialists at DGS that can help you navigate through how to use the Kelly Procure system.
Thank you, Angela. Okay, we are 15 minutes before the hour. So we're at the point where we're going to go ahead and hit some of the other questions I see have been typed into the tool. And by the way, as you're typing those in, remember that I'm old and reading this across the room. So 3-paragraph long question is hard for me to
That is
consume.
2 of us. Yeah.
So,
3 of us.
but at this point, if you have questions and you want to use the raise your hand function, we can actually call on you, and I believe we'll be able to unmute you and have you ask the question person to person, and you can respond to it that way. So as people are queuing up for that, let me hit a couple of the other written questions that are in here. There was a question around software as a service, and is that something that has to go through CDT or DGS? And unfortunately, that's another one of those that's not necessarily a simple question.
It depends.
Yeah, it depends. What are we really doing with software as a service? What is the type of data that's there? Is it simply, for example, a software as a service surveying tool? That's a pretty simple
Off
one.
the shelf.
Yeah, it doesn't require much interaction. But if it's a service where it actually interfaces with our systems, or it was approved in the budget via BCP or things along those lines, it's still an IT project. And yes, based on the type of authorization and project that it is, that would come to CDT as a project approval. And then we figure out the best procurement mechanism. It might be an LPA procurement, but a project that has oversight from CDT. So I'm apologizing. I can't give you a more specific answer without maybe a more specific scenario. Software as a service, we absolutely believe is a good thing. If it exists, we don't need to go create it, but they're not one size fits all as we look at those. Let's see, other questions. Exemptions. State agencies issuing LPAs, MSA and CMAS type procurements. Are they required to have Q&A periods? Actually, I won't try to answer that. I'll just hand that to Angela.
So it just really depends on what the department is doing with that particular procurement. So there's no, because on most of our LPAs, the competition has already been achieved typically at the agreement level. And so what departments are doing is using the request for offer process to then come in and refine the specific services or goods that they need, try to get better pricing if at all possible, and do a secondary level of what we would call competition, but not the mandatory competition that DGS has typically already achieved through the prime agreement, if you will, the LPA. So it just depends on what the department is asking for. The department could issue an RFO off of a CMAS or an MSA that could have, a lot of requirements in it for whatever reason. It's maybe not something that requires a full request for proposal process or full competition, but they want to get the best vendor in that meets the needs of the State Department. So they may have a Q&A process. There's always an opportunity. Every procurement will have the name of the buyer, always, because you need to know who you can talk to. So if for some reason it doesn't have an official schedule that says, your Q&A is due by, whatever date, always contact that buyer if you have a question. Their name will always be listed on the procurement, and that's your opportunity to reach out if you have a question.
Yeah. And I'll just add to that. So the RFOs being an informal. So when you look at that on your, your tiered purchasing authority, just there, I think in many instances, it's a responsibility, right, of the vendors to point out omissions or errors or areas where there needs to be clarification. So as Angela said, it doesn't necessarily have to be a targeted CAD, key action date in the RFO.
Okay, thank you. There's a question that I am going to expand on a little bit to make sure that we address context. Not 100% sure it's the context it was asked though. So the question, are state agencies required to give a small business 5% preference? We rarely see those in RFOs, which implies to me this is based on a leverage procurement. So I'm doing CMAS or MSA, and as a department writes the statement of work, how does that small business DVBE component figure into a leverage procurement from a department perspective?
Yeah, it really, again, it depends on, did the overarching agreement have small business participation? But a department always has the option if they are doing some level of a request for offer. Because keep in mind, there are some leverage procurement. It's not generally on the IT side, but for services, if they're IT services, there'll be multiple vendors and they're going to want to get the best cost. And so oftentimes you will see that 5%. But if let's just say it's a goods contract and DGS has already achieved a small business preference at the LPA level, then you won't generally see a 5% preference because it's already been achieved at the level. And what they'll ask for is, we want to know that you're actually using the small businesses that are listed in the leverage procurement agreement. So it really depends on the type of procurement. Some LPAs, they will provide a preference, a small business preference, if they're not using a direct small business. And keep in mind, if a department is using the Dvbe option, it's small business competing against small business. So you're not going to see a preference in that either request for offer or if it's intent for, a request for a bid, an IFB. Invitation for bid, sorry, too many acronyms in our brain here. So yeah, it really depends on the type of procurement that department is issuing as to whether they give a preference. But keep in mind that the small business program and the Dvbe program apply across everything that the state does. That is an independent sort of set of requirements that all departments have to look at when they're issuing procurements. So.
And Angela, just to add, and correct me if I'm wrong, I believe departments are incentivized. They have goals, right, to reach. And so even though your preference isn't in your RFO, that still goes towards your DVBE or small business goals.
Right. They want to know if there's going to be any small business participation, if you are a small business prime, because the department wants to be able to use those dollars to say they are meeting their 25% small business goal across the entirety of their spend.
Yeah. So let me chase a slight tangent on that. So assume I am a small business. How do I let the larger systems integration vendors, for example, know that I am available and interested in partnering with them on a response? Is there anything the state does there, or is that the representative organizations?
Well, if it's a competitive procurement that's been listed in Cali Procure, there actually is an option in the advertisement portion to say you can advertise as a DVBE or a small business that, you know, I provide these services. So there is an opportunity for people to do that, to outreach to anybody that's interested in bidding on that particular contract. So yes, that option is there in the Cali Procure system.
We also hold bidders conferences. And so that's where we hope relationships are formed between those small businesses and the primary contractors.
Yeah, thank you. Another question, and actually before I go to that, do we have any with the hand raised for people to ask questions?
We do.
The Q&A seems to be actually working very well.
Nice. We have 2 hands raised. Our first hand is Cindy Welton. And Cindy, I have allowed you to unmute yourself.
Hi, Cindy. Maybe. Cindy, go ahead and ask your question if you can.
Cindy's not unmuting yet. Cindy, why don't we queue you up and you will be next. I'm going to go to Edward Stengel. Edward, please.
Hi, thank you for the time. I'm an IT staffing company, and what would be the best way to work with the state providing resources on a staff augmentation basis?
So one of the first things from the DGS perspective, I would say, is that when we open it up again, you would apply to get on the master service agreement for technology, digital and data consulting. Again, our acronyms. You know, we have opportunities there for all different size businesses to list their hourly rates, and then departments just reach out directly. You list your classifications that you have, and there's, you know, criteria for that. And then you get on that contract, and that's an opportunity to be on that easier procurement process versus competing in a open procurement, open competitive procurement.
And do you still partner with CMAS on other IT consulting as well?
Yeah, there's CMAS. The TDDC is the largest contract where we have our IT consulting, but there is CMAS. And if what you do, we'll just stop with that. There's also the CMAS, but CMAS is based on the General Services Administration schedules. And so there is an additional criteria for CMAS. If you do not have a GSA schedule, then we would have to have additional conversations about, whether you have something similar, because we use the federal requirements under the CMAS. But the TDDC is really one of the easier ways to compete at the state level on an LPA, and then departments can directly use you.
I could
And
find that
outside of
through
that-
the, I'm sorry, I could find that through the G, DGS website?
Yep, the
Okay.
DGS website.
Okay,
And another
thank you.
important aspect is the market, make sure you get to know those departments and form relationships. Many times we'll ask for a bidders list, if it is informal. So make sure to market.
Yeah, there was a question earlier in the list. How do we connect with departments? That really is forming those relationships. A lot of times the relationship happens well before an actual procurement. So different departments do it differently. Some hold vendor days. Some of them wait until there's a procurement. But in the federated model under which we operate, department AIOs, CIOs, or agency AIOs, department CIOs, really look to have those relationships formed to know what's out there, so that when a procurement comes along, they know to whom they want to direct that via the leverage procurement process. If they know about you, then they can specifically make sure you are aware of a solicitation that comes out. All right. Did we get Cindy?
Cindy Welton.
For the question? She had the hand raised.
She has her hand raised, but her mic is not going live. So
Okay.
I will unraise her hand. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. All right, we are approaching the end. Let me see if there's maybe a question that we can hit real quickly.
Probably the electronic that you submitted.
Go ahead.
So definitely, if not before the pandemic hit, the state was moving towards accepting electronic submissions. So I can't speak for all departments, but I know that CDT and DGS, we use the same platform to accept those, as well as I believe every department I've worked with so far over the last 2 years.
Yeah, so it just really depends on what's in the solicitation. And it may be different depending on which department. So always, like Tiffany talked about earlier, always read fully through that solicitation so that you have an understanding of what your requirements are, because you do not want to miss a deadline. And that's the only thing that happened, is you missed the deadline.
All right, thank you. All right, we are quickly approaching the end. So let me ask one last question of each of you. Anything that you want to close the session with? Something that a message that you want to relay to the vendor community, or something else? So, Tiffany, let me start with you. See if there's a closing point.
Yeah, the closing point, Russ, thank you. Is I'm really excited to see the trends in procurement going more towards that transparency, working with vendors, educating them, and really just modernizing how we do procurement. So thank you. Looking forward to participation with that. So please, whenever you have innovative ideas, send them our way.
Same question.
Yeah, and I would say, all the same things Tiffany said. I mean, I think we're continuing to look at DGS, at, our processes, the state's processes, because again, as I touched on earlier, we set the policy for all of the state of California, both for IT and non-IT goods and services. And so, for us, it's really about making sure that we have competition, that our processes are efficient and effective. Our customers get what they need from contracting. And then we have that very robust participation from our Dvbe communities.
All right. Well, I want to thank both of you for coming in today, spending an hour. Obviously, lots of interest in procurement. It is a really complex.
Never thought it would have been that
process.
way, Russ. Never thought. We were just talking about that. Like, we can't believe how many people are so interested in procurement when we started. So
Yeah,
it's great.
it's important. It really is intended to be a partnership between the vendor community and the state. We use contracts to accomplish outcomes. And a lot of times, for whatever reason, sometimes we forget that the outcome is what we're shooting for, and we get wrapped up in some of the contract conversations. And I think the general goal that both DGS and CDT have is meeting eye to eye with the vendor community. And how do we accomplish that? And where there are rough spots, how do we adjust? How do we improve the process, the selection process, pricing, adding products, whatever those things are. So please, as you have questions, please direct them to Tiffany's group or to Angela's group. we will actually absolutely help you navigate that process because we want that competition. We want those services to be available. We can only be successful if you guys are successful as well. So thank you again for the time. We look forward. I have a feeling we'll do another one on procurement before too awfully long. So thank you very much for joining us, and we wish you all the very best afternoons. Have a good day.
Thank you, everybody.